Thank you for joining us. Welcome back. This is the third anniversary of the Biden administration, of Biden's inauguration, and where Trump, Trump didn't show for that inauguration. That was not
I know.
exactly an easy transition, the kind of transition the founders of America thought about. I think it was,
No.
well, we'll get into talking about Donald Trump, Heather.
If
How
we
are you?
have to. If we have to. I think we have to. Well, let's start with that, unfortunately, and then we can move on. So the Iowa caucuses this week. Huh.
It's so interesting because they happened Monday, and today's Saturday, and it feels like it was a different year. I mean, there's been so much news,
Yeah.
but were you impressed by those Iowa caucuses, Heather?
Impressed is not the word I would use. And there's confirmation bias is real. I mean, I like to find journalists and pundits and everyone else who are saying it wasn't as historic as we all think it was or said it was. Um, let's look at the numbers, right? 110,000 people. It was 186,000 in 2016 that came out, right? So lesser, and there was weather. I mean, we are not the first to talk about this, but
Well,
I
the
did
turnout
like,
was the turnout was the lowest in
right?
something in the order of 20 years. But
Yeah,
what got my eye and my attention is that Donald Trump got 2% of the vote of Iowans. I mean, if you
right,
if you look at the total vote he got, it's 2%
right.
of Iowa. And
And even
Iowa
of the
is
Republicans, it was under 10%,
yeah,
right?
that's right, right.
Right,
That's right. Yeah, so
right,
you got 2% of Iowa.
right.
Iowa is a measly, I mean, I'm not being derogatory.
No, you love
No,
Iowa.
Iowa does a measly percentage of the United States. I mean, to read anything into that Iowa caucus,
Right.
as obviously the major media did, I think is absurd.
Well, that's the important thing. What can you extrapolate from 110,000 people, in Iowa? The other poll I really like to see was that there were over 25% or around 25% of likely caucus goers, Republicans, would said they would not vote for Trump in the general. Um, and
You mean
that's interesting.
if he's convicted?
If he's convicted, and in general, they said it. So if he's convicted, the numbers go even higher. But so there's a discrepancy between what we're seeing today and what people envision in November and where things might stand. And I have to remember that.
Well, I think we all do because it's easy to get, I mean, particularly with the press already proclaiming him the nominee and maybe even the president. It's
Yeah,
easy at this early point, I mean, 9 months or more before the election, to get kind of
right,
crazy, and we have to be careful we don't.
right.
I mean, the things that really stuck out for me
Hmm.
this week. Rather than the Iowa caucus, were what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in the
Right.
Middle East, what's happening with regard to the continuing resolution, what the Republicans are doing on the Hill, particularly the House Republicans. Do you want to talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit, Heather?
Yes. So government shutdown averted,
Big
right?
deal. I mean, that's good. Let's celebrate. That's a positive.
It's good. But what Mike Johnson is up to, it's problematic. You tell us what's happening in terms of choices made about Ukraine and the border.
Well, Mike Johnson is in a very, very difficult spot. Not surprising, because he's got to keep his right wing happy.
Yeah.
They could vote him out of being speaker tomorrow, and any one of them could. I mean, they could call for vote, and he only has a very tiny majority
Yeah.
anyway. So he's got to keep them happy, but at the same time, he has gone along with the continuing resolution,
Yeah.
which is making them very unhappy. In order to get aid to Ukraine,
That's
he
it.
is telling the Biden administration that they've got to give way to the radical right Republicans on immigration. What do the radical right immigration Republicans, what radical right Republicans want on immigration? They basically want to cut down on asylum,
Yep.
the legal
Yep.
right that we've had in pride. We prided ourselves in this country. You know, if
Right.
people are escaping from violence and repression, they want to cut back on that. They also want to cut back on something called humanitarian parole,
Parole. Yep.
which is something that we've given to people who are escaping Ukraine, to people who are escaping from Afghanistan. I mean, it's a humanitarian.
Right.
It's usually because we in the United States, as a matter of public policy and our own sympathies, want to help these people. Well, no, the Republicans don't want to do that either.
I know. The human aspect to it is, just lacking. I'm in so much of the coverage that's happening as well.
Well, the
I don't
coverage
know
is
what.
not terribly helpful. Most people in this country are not terribly in favor of new immigrants coming in. Just like trade is not popular, well, even worse than that is immigration. And you can't be somebody campaigning on more immigrants, letting more immigrants in. Although, Heather, honestly, most of the things that the Republicans are sort of fueling this fear of immigrants with are bogus. They make
Yeah,
no
that's
sense. The
exactly it.
idea that immigrants are taking away jobs from Americans,
Yep.
baloney. I mean, we have the extremely low unemployment rate
Right.
for 4 years under, or for 2 years certainly under 4%. We've had and the idea that immigrants are bringing in fentanyl and all sorts of dangerous drugs again is belied by the data, which shows that most of that, 90% of it, is coming through the ports of entry.
Right.
86% is coming in with U.S. citizens.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing after another.
Yep.
They are demagoguing, but
And
unfortunately, it's getting through.
yeah, and lies and conflation around crime rates. I mean, you pick it. They're going after it. This reminds me of, you wrote a piece on Substack, one of about 40, I think it was this week. You had a lot to say, and I loved it. Was about Jamie Dimon. So he and a lot of the uber wealthy, are at Davos this week, Davos. Um, And he said a number of things on CNBC where he was saying, Trump, I mean, he was right about a lot of stuff. I mean, let me do a list. NATO,
Well,
immigration.
Heather, let's be clear. I mean, Jamie Dimon is the most influential CEO in the United States. He speaks for American business over and over again. He is the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in the United States. So he has huge clout. And huge political clout. And for him to say, and he did this Wednesday, for him to say that Trump was basically right on immigration, and Trump was right on the economy, and Trump was right on taxes, and to say that the Trump administration that we all suffered through was not as bad as many of us think, and we should maybe rethink our positions on Trump. That to me is shameful. I mean, shame on Jamie Dimon.
But
Because
also CNBC, the journalists, no one pushes back on it. Everyone kind of
well, they
nods
don't
their heads.
because they don't want to in any way uh, jeopardize their access to Jamie Dimon,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Jamie Dimon doesn't want to jeopardize his access to a possible Trump administration. That's the game here that's being
Yeah.
played because Dimon came out in favor of Nikki Haley,
Right.
and then Trump was incensed. And Trump said publicly on Truth Social on his post, well, then I don't have to deal with Jamie Dimon in the future. You can imagine the effect on Jamie Dimon, who has all this influence and
And
is
the
expected to have the
backtracking, I
influence,
know.
when he hears that Trump says, "Well, I'm not going to even deal with him anymore
Yeah.
if I become president." Jamie
Yeah.
Dimon now is basically doing what he can to
Right.
ingratiate himself with Trump.
Right. And we can't, I know you say this and we say this and a lot of people say it, but the importance of the media in this day and age, and there's a lack of trust in it, and that's understandable. But you see all these studies that show that when the media are saying things like Biden's old, Biden's terrible, no one likes Biden, Biden's the worst. And when you're leading with that versus not even Trump's the worst, which they could also say, but these are Trump's indictments and these are the facts that are happening and these are lies. Um,
Or that
there is
Trump
a
is out of,
difference
or that Trump is
in
out of his
perception.
gourd. The Trump is
Well, right.
actually,
But even
I
if we
mean,
don't look at that, even if we don't go there, just listing the fact of indictments changes how people see the world.
well, again, I'm struck by how many Republicans say they are not going to vote for Trump if he is convicted.
Right.
And what worries me is that his entire
Yeah.
strategy with regard to all of those cases is delay, delay, delay.
Right.
And I'm
But
not
so
talking about Tom delay. I'm talking about delay.
no, yeah, different delay. But so it's so interesting. So it's both sidesism. We've talked about that and false equivalence, right? So there are logical fallacies happening. But then there's what you just said. There's a fear of going against the people with the power. That's a
Or people
terrible
who might
combination.
have the power. Yeah,
Right.
that's what really worries me, and I see more of, Heather, because and this is out of the fascist playbook. I mean, this
I
is what
know.
happened in Germany in 1933, 1934. You have all of the leaders of society beginning to say, well, maybe this fascist is not so bad because they want access. They want to be able to influence the next administration. And so it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling, awful, frightening, uh, perpetual, fulfillment. It's what Jamie Dimon, when Jamie Dimon, who is the most influential leading business figure in America,
Right.
does what he did and compliments Trump's policies, and doesn't even mention the fact that Trump is a traitor and Trump is a dangerous loony bin. Uh, to America, that is a signal to the rest of corporate America and CEOs, well, you better get in line.
Right. Speaking of CEOs, how about Boeing? So you put a couple pieces out this week about Boeing. A lot of people have said some interesting things. Tell
Well,
us about, yeah,
I said, and I hope you excuse my language, I said Boeing,
I saw
Boeing
that.
is one of the shittiest companies
I saw
in the
that.
world.
We
Uh,
forgive you.
and, and, and I mean, you look at, it's a monopoly for one thing. Boeing was allowed in the 1990s to merge with McDonnell Douglas, the only competitor. So that you have one giant, basically it ought to be nationalized. It's one giant privately held firm on which we are totally dependent. The entire
Right.
airline industry is dependent. It
Yeah.
can't get Airbus. The Airbus is the only competitor. It's
Right.
European. There is a huge backlog of Airbuses because it's the quality is better for Airbus.
And
The
just let's remind
CEO,
people, Boeing CEO makes 22.5 million, I think, a year, even if his bonus doesn't happen sometimes. And
which is
Airbus is,
six, which Heather is 6 times
I
the
know.
pay of Airbus, of Airbus's
Right.
CEO.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
and Boeing has the trouble is if you're a monopolist, you get fat and lazy. And Boeing's shareholders are not public shareholders like Airbus. Boeing's shareholders are big financial institutions. They are pushing Boeing to have higher and higher profits so the stock price goes higher. And what
Yeah.
does Boeing do? It outsources a
Yeah.
lot of equipment. I mean, the plug that the window plug that basically burst out of that Air Alaska plane, that plug was not made in Wichita, Kansas by Boeing. That plug had been outsourced to some firm in Malaysia. I mean,
Right.
and this is where you get some of these inevitable when you're only looking at profits. You get some of these inevitable attempts to cut costs and
And then
cut
did you
safety.
see related to this more Elon Musk horribleness where he was coming out and saying, the reason this happened at Boeing and there were bolts issues is because of DEI initiatives.
Well,
I mean,
Elon Musk. I mean, I hate to even quote him.
yeah,
When I'm not fulminating against and feeling outraged by Trump, I mean, who is the other proto-fascist in
I
America
know.
who is even less responsible? Elon Musk.
I know, and his reach is so far. And I mean, the number of white folks in leadership positions, CEO on down, I mean, it's just the facts are, it's racist. I mean, come on. But then can we do, there was some positive antitrust news. Who doesn't love some positive antitrust news?
Well,
Where,
I live for positive
well,
antitrust
you
news.
actually
I mean,
do.
I
I
really
know you
do.
do. This is old news. But so we had JetBlue and Spirit not able to merge, Department of Justice says, is the latest. Talk a little bit about that. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal, and the Department of Justice, the Antitrust Division of the Department of Justice, and the Federal Trade Commission are the two big
Right.
antitrust agencies, anti-monopoly agencies in the United States. In terms of antitrust enforcement, both of them have been moribund. I mean, they haven't done anything for years. Under Biden, they're both really, really energetic, alive activists. They are making it difficult for a lot of firms to merge, and they are
Right.
looking very, very closely at Amazon, at Google. They are forcing the lawyers, the solicitors, the general counsels in a lot of these big corporations to
Right.
in turn say to the CEOs, wait a minute, before you do that merger or before you do this, just think twice. We don't want to have a big anti-monopoly case. That's
Right.
good. That's
Right.
good.
Right. Right. Now, this is such a conundrum, right? So this is fabulous stuff that Biden has done as it relates to breaking up big corporations and not allowing too much power, which helps consumers and the economy, all of it, right? Um, but it's in terms of political messaging, which is, we talk about this a lot. It's so interesting because just going out and doing a list, a video, a something that says, look at all I did, does not go over well with people these days. And I have to
No,
say, I mean, you think about it, this is a little overly reductionist, but I mean, when I'm liaising with my husband and I'm like, look at what I did all day, look at the list, expecting him to do something different in the future, he doesn't love that. That's not a great way to communicate with him.
well, it's not a
So
great way
it's,
to get him to do more. I
well,
mean,
that's my point. But so in terms
yeah,
of political messaging, Biden's doing all these things. And then I know people get frustrated and say, well, we should shout them from the mountaintops. But it's interesting that it doesn't necessarily help as it relates to the election to shout from the mountaintops as such without putting a clear villain out there. Yeah,
I
it's
think that's
important to
that's
think
absolutely
about.
right, Heather. Heather, there are two problems when Biden tries to campaign, as he's doing it, and all his surrogates are trying to do, by kind of bragging about Bidenomics. One problem is that, and this is the perennial problem. I remember in the Clinton administration it was the same thing. When you tell people how good they have it, inevitably they say, "Really? I mean, I have, you created all these jobs. I have three of them.
Right,
Really? Wages are so far up. Why am I living paycheck to paycheck? I
right.
mean, you don't. You're out of you're out of out of contact with the real
Out of
world.
touch. Yeah,
That's problem number one. Problem number two is a problem for Biden, particularly right now, and particularly with young people, and that's the Middle East. I mean, a lot of people are upset with the Biden administration
yeah,
for encouraging or at least embracing or not
right.
stopping Israel in Gaza.
Yeah,
And let's face it, this is going to be a huge, huge
it is
potential
huge.
problem.
And they're not wrong. I mean, this is horrific what's happening. So
It's
we'll have to
completely
see.
horrific.
But it's completely horrific, but as it relates to our federal election, it's interesting to think about it. And we'll have to see, more will be revealed over the coming months, for worse or for better, right? I mean,
Well,
really,
also,
truly, we're still
yeah,
far away from the election.
it is far away from the election, but also
Ish.
the idea that Donald Trump, the likely Republican nominee, is going to be sort of any better or would have been
I
better
know. I
in
know.
terms of restraining Israel is absurd.
I know. I mean, and we could talk about that. And also, right. Anyway, okay. So next week we have, what should we look forward to? I'm not sure, but there's New Hampshire.
Heather, there are so many
Was
things to
that
look
was
forward
that
to.
negative? Did that feel
Yeah, no,
negative?
no, it sounded a little bit on the negative side. I mean, you were a positive person. I mean,
Ish. No, I
yeah,
am.
no, think of all the meals,
The
television
meals or the
shows,
mules?
the
The
meals,
meal.
and think of, I mean, think of your
Think of the mules.
family and your wonderful husband and your kid, and
Yeah.
you have all kinds of things to look
No,
forward
I
to.
do in my
But,
personal life, but in terms of political realities, but so New
well,
Hampshire's coming up.
there's the New Hampshire primary. I mean,
Right,
aren't you
exactly.
excited? You are excited by
Excited
that.
is not a word I would use for me and the New Hampshire primary. I am interested to see what happens. And then again, confirmation bias will be looking to see those people who make me feel better about it. Um,
I love New Hampshire. I went to college in New Hampshire, and I've been involved in New Hampshire primaries forever. Starting in the late 19th century. And New Hampshire primaries are interesting because they can make a difference. Nikki
right,
Haley is now basically Nikki Haley and Donald Trump are the only candidates. And the question is, does he beat her by 40 points or by 50 points or by 30
Right.
points? It's kind of an
But
expectations game.
we said that about Iowa, and it was interesting because DeSantis kind of creeped ahead. I know it wasn't by much, but
It's
I think
it really was insignificant. Remember
right,
the numbers we were dealing with, and New Hampshire is also a very small and very white state,
right,
and we can't read too much into it. But
right,
Donald Trump is now really attacking Haley.
yeah,
Uh, and when we talk about Donald Trump attacking somebody, it's not just the normal attacks we have become used to in politics. It's vicious, angry, personal, ad
this,
hominem. It's really the
yeah,
worst kinds of stuff.
I
And
know, and sexist, by the way. There's a lot of misogyny. I mean,
oh, of course.
I
I
know
mean,
it's
his
horrible.
trial for raping Miss Carroll that
I
keeps on
know.
going on. That was part of the week
I
as
know.
well.
And then he's showing up. I mean, it's hard to ever know with him what's part of the campaign. I mean, there are a lot of lawsuits happening about this, but what's his campaigning and what's his showing up at court and what's his just being awful, and it's all so intertwined. So we'll see
It's
what happens.
completely intertwined because
Yeah.
his campaign and his court performances and his performances on the campaign trail and his own sociopathic personality are all the same.
Yeah. And there'll be more of that in the Granite State. Is that what it is? What's New
Yes, the
Hampshire?
granite state.
Yeah.
Do you want me to, shall I sing? And the granite of New Hampshire in their muscles and their brains. That was the Dartmouth theme song.
Wow. In their
Yeah,
muscles and their brains.
yeah.
Those are good places to have the granite, I guess. I don't know. Those are some interesting lyrics, but thank
Yeah,
you.
well, Heather, you can sing away, and I want you to have a great week. Everybody who's watching, have a great week and enjoy yourself, and don't pay much attention to politics. We'll bring you up to date next Saturday at the Coffee Klatch.
And thank you for tuning in.
Bye.